Veilrix, the dragon, hovered silently at the edge of the broken orbital station. His massive wings brushed against the metal walls, sending faint echoes through the empty corridors. The station had been abandoned for years, a relic of human expansion in deep space. Most ships avoided it, thinking it dangerous and haunted, but Veilrix had come here alone. He did not know why he felt drawn to this place. Perhaps it was the quiet. Perhaps it was the faint smell of life long gone. Veilrix had lived for centuries. He had seen worlds burn, armies crumble, and civilizations rise and fall. He had been feared and respected, known across systems as a creature of power. Yet despite all his strength, something had been missing in his long existence. He could not understand it, only that he felt a pull toward the faint lights flickering below, near a small section of the station that still seemed alive. Inside, a human worked alone in a small workshop. Tomas Reed, a human engineer, had spent years repairing machines, building things from scraps, and keeping the last remnants of the station functional. His hands were rough and covered in oil, but his movements were careful, precise, almost gentle. The workshop was cluttered with old tools, broken toys, and pieces of metal that had no clear purpose. Despite the disorder, there was a rhythm to Tomas' work, a quiet persistence that Veilrix had never seen before. At first, the dragon stayed hidden. He watched the human move among the scraps, talking quietly to himself as he carved a small wooden figure. Veilrix could hear the sound of the blade scraping against the wood, the soft taps of a hammer, and the faint murmur of words that seemed to make no sense. The dragon felt a strange curiosity rise in him. Why would a human spend so much time on something so small, so fragile, when the universe was full of power and danger? Tomas stopped for a moment and looked toward the window as if he sensed someone outside. Veilrix froze. The dragon was not used to being unseen. Usually when he appeared, fear and panic followed. Ships fled. People screamed. Stars themselves seemed to tremble. But the human did not run. He did not raise a weapon. Instead, Tomas returned to his work, picking up a small piece of wood and continuing to carve. Veilrix tilted his head, confused. This human was not afraid. This human was calm. Curiosity turned into boldness. Veilrix moved closer, careful not to make a sound. His shadow stretched across the floor as he leaned over the workshop window, peering inside. He could see Tomas' hands shaping a tiny figure. It was a small dragon, carved with care, smooth edges, and a delicate smile etched onto its face. Veilrix felt an unfamiliar sensation stir in his chest. Was this joy? He had never experienced such a feeling before. The dragon tried to mimic the human, using a claw to touch the wood, but he was too large, too strong. The piece splintered under his weight. Frustration prickled through him, but Tomas only glanced at the splintered wood and smiled softly. He said something in a gentle voice, though Veilrix could not understand the words. Yet somehow the tone carried encouragement. It was not anger. It was not fear. It was patience. Veilrix stayed longer than he expected. He watched Tomas work through the night, the human humming softly as he sanded a small wheel for a toy. Stars outside twinkled coldly, but inside the workshop there was warmth, light, and sound. Veilrix did not realize that he had been holding his breath until he let it out slowly, a small puff of smoke escaping his nostrils. The next morning, the human moved to another part of the workshop, carrying a tray of small tools. Veilrix crept closer, trying to understand the purpose of each tool. A hammer, a chisel, a file. None of it seemed dangerous. Each item was used to shape, to create, to fix. Veilrix had spent centuries mastering destruction, but he had never learned creation. Perhaps, he thought, this human could teach him something entirely new. As days passed, Veilrix returned again and again. He never spoke. He did not attack. He merely watched and tried to imitate. Tomas noticed the broken toys, the ruined pieces left by the dragon's heavy claws, but he never complained. Instead, he left extra pieces of wood and small tools out in plain sight, silently inviting the dragon to try again. Veilrix felt a cautious hope growing inside him. Maybe he could learn. Maybe he could do something other than frighten and destroy. One evening, a strong gust of wind shook the station. Loose panels rattled and the lights flickered. Veilrix flared his wings to steady himself, and the human rushed to secure the workshop window. Their eyes met briefly. Veilrix felt a strange connection, a bond that needed no words. The human trusted him enough to continue his work even while the dragon watched so closely. And in that trust, Veilrix began to understand something he had never felt before. He was not alone. For the first time in centuries, Veilrix felt a small, unfamiliar stir of warmth in his heart. It was not power. It was not fear. It was curiosity, wonder, and a quiet longing to be part of something. The dragon realized that he could learn from this human, that there was more to life than destruction, more to existence than fear. And as the stars turned outside, Veilrix leaned closer to the window, eager for his first lesson in creation. The workshop remained a tiny island of life in the empty station. The dragon's shadow grew longer with each passing day, but it no longer brought fear. It brought change. And change, Veilrix understood, was the first step toward joy. Veilrix returned to the workshop before dawn, the cold emptiness of space pressing against his scales. He had not slept, nor had he eaten, yet he felt lighter than he had in centuries. The sight of Tomas already at work filled him with a strange eagerness. The human was humming softly as he sanded a small block of wood, shaping it into a tiny spaceship. Veilrix watched closely, his massive eyes reflecting the flickering light of the workshop. The dragon had tried before, clumsy with his huge claws. Every time he touched the tools, the wood splintered or the hammer slipped. Frustration had made him roar once, a sound that had echoed through the station's corridors, but Tomas had only smiled and continued working. That smile, calm and patient, had stayed in Veilrix's mind. Today he would try again. Carefully, he lowered a claw onto a small block of scrap wood that Tomas had left nearby. His claws, large and heavy, pinched the wood too hard, cracking it immediately. Veilrix hissed softly, smoke curling from his nostrils. He had expected failure, yet it still stung. Tomas looked over, tilting his head, and spoke softly. Though the dragon could not understand the words, the tone was clear. It was not anger. It was guidance. The human set aside his work and approached the broken piece of wood. With nimble hands, he demonstrated how to hold the tool lightly, how to move slowly, how to feel the wood instead of forcing it. Veilrix's eyes followed every movement. He lowered his claw again, copying the human as best he could. This time the wood did not split, though it was scratched and uneven. He had made something new, and a spark of pride flickered inside him. Days passed in this quiet rhythm. Veilrix learned how to grip chisels and hammers without crushing the materials. He learned to carve small shapes, smooth edges, and even paint tiny figures. Each attempt was imperfect, but Tomas never complained. Instead, he left extra tools, scraps of wood, and pieces of old toys for practice. The dragon began to look forward to these moments, eager to try again and again. One morning, Tomas noticed that a small wooden toy had disappeared from the workbench. Veilrix had taken it, curious and unsure. The dragon had not meant to steal, only to study it. Instead of scolding, Tomas smiled and left another unfinished toy in its place, with extra tools around it. Veilrix understood the gesture. He could try again and failure would not be punished. Encouraged, the dragon experimented more boldly. He carved a small wooden soldier, clumsy but recognizable. He painted a tiny spaceship, uneven but detailed. Tomas watched silently, occasionally offering small corrections, showing Veilrix how to smooth edges or steady the paintbrush. The dragon's confidence grew, though every new shape brought a flutter of anxiety. He had never made anything to bring joy. He had only taken it. Veilrix began to notice subtle changes in himself. He felt lighter, more alive. The act of creating something new, something gentle, brought a feeling he could not name. Curiosity turned to fascination, fascination to excitement. For the first time, he wanted to see the result of his work, not because it was useful in battle, but because it could make someone smile. The dragon's attempts grew more ambitious. He tried making a small wooden dragon, mimicking the carvings Tomas had done. It was awkward and uneven, but Veilrix carefully painted tiny scales along its back. When he stepped back, he saw it as a whole, a creature that had never existed before. A strange warmth spread through his chest. This was creation, and he was capable of it. Tomas noticed the change too. The human began leaving messages and simple sketches and diagrams, showing step by step how to build toys, repair broken pieces, or assemble small mechanisms. Veilrix studied them carefully, tracing the lines with his claws, trying to follow each instruction. He failed many times, but with each failure he improved. One evening, the human stopped working and looked directly at Veilrix. He placed a small wooden block in front of the dragon and motioned for him to try. Veilrix hesitated, then picked up the block carefully. He carved slowly, remembering all he had learned. The result was a small, crude toy dragon, but to Veilrix, it felt perfect. He lifted it, examining every curve, every detail, and for the first time he felt pride without fear. The dragon's attempts began to attract attention beyond himself. Small things left scattered around the workshop, scraps of carved wood, painted figures, created a quiet sense of life in the empty station. Veilrix began to understand the rhythm of creation, the patient shaping, the gentle polishing, the careful painting. Each toy was a small triumph, a small miracle born from effort rather than destruction. Veilrix also learned patience in another way. When he ruined a piece or cracked a block, he did not lash out. Instead, he stepped back, studied what went wrong, and tried again. Tomas never forced him to do more than he could. Instead, he allowed the dragon to discover solutions on his own, guiding only when necessary. This was new. In battle, Veilrix had never needed patience. Every problem had been solved with force. Here, patience was everything. Weeks passed and the dragon's skill improved. He no longer feared making mistakes. He embraced them as part of the process. He began leaving small toys around the workshop for Tomas to find, silent gifts of gratitude. The human would smile, nod, and continue his own work. Their bond grew quietly through gestures, shared space, and the unspoken understanding that neither feared the other. Veilrix realized that this was more than learning to carve or paint. He was learning to feel, to experience joy, and to create beauty instead of chaos. Each day brought small victories and small wonders, and for the first time in his long life, the dragon felt hope. Hope that he could be more than fear and destruction. Hope that life could be gentle and bright. And in the quiet of the broken workshop, with Tomas humming and tools clinking, Veilrix took his first real lesson, not in strength but in creation. Veilrix had begun to look forward to the mornings more than anything else. The cold emptiness of space no longer felt lonely when he could spend hours in the workshop with Tomas. Each day brought new challenges and each failure taught him patience. The dragon's massive claws were no longer clumsy, though they still made mistakes. He had learned to move carefully, to hold tools lightly, and to study the wood before touching it. That morning, Veilrix carried a block of wood in his claws and examined it from every angle. Tomas was already at work assembling tiny wheels for a toy cart. The human looked up and gave a small nod as if encouraging the dragon to begin. Veilrix lowered himself carefully and began carving. The block slowly transformed under his touch into a small animal figure. The edges were uneven and the paint was blotchy, but the dragon felt pride bloom inside him. He had made something and it was his own. Over the next few weeks, Veilrix experimented with more complex toys. He tried making spinning tops, tiny wooden spaceships, and small animals. Some were ruined instantly when his claws slipped, and others fell apart when he painted them too thickly. But each time Tomas showed him how to fix the mistakes. Sometimes, the human would simply place a tiny brush or a new piece of wood in front of him and gesture silently. Veilrix learned to understand these gestures, and soon he could follow them without needing words. One day while Tomas was repairing a small music box, Veilrix carved a little wooden bird. He painted it carefully, making the wings as delicate as possible. Then, out of curiosity, he set it on the floor and watched as it wobbled slightly but remained upright. He tilted his head and exhaled a small puff of smoke. For the first time, Veilrix realized that he had made something that could move and bring joy, even in the smallest way. The dragon began leaving these small creations in different corners of the workshop. Each toy was a silent gift, a way to say thank you without words. Tomas would smile when he found them, sometimes laughing softly. Veilrix found that seeing the human's reaction brought him more joy than he had ever felt from fire or flight or battle. Creation, he realized, could be stronger than destruction in its own way. One evening, a warning light blinked across the station. Supplies were low, and the small group of human refugees living in the lower levels had begun to struggle. Veilrix watched them from the upper corridors. He saw children sitting quietly, holding broken toys or empty hands, their eyes wide with sadness. The dragon felt a strange pull in his chest. He had never cared for humans beyond their usefulness in battle. Now he wanted to help them even if they did not know he existed. Veilrix began making toys for the children. He carved animals, little wooden robots, and tiny ships. He painted them as carefully as he could, even though his claws were large and heavy. He set them down near the children's quarters before dawn, careful not to be seen. The next morning, laughter rang out across the station. The children had found the toys and were playing together, squealing with delight. Veilrix watched from the shadows, smoke curling from his nostrils in a way that Tomas recognized as happiness. Tomas came running, alarmed at first, but then he saw the toys and realized what had happened. He turned to look at the empty corridor where Veilrix had been hiding and whispered softly, "You did this, didn't you?" Veilrix lowered his head slightly, unsure how to respond. Tomas smiled and nodded, understanding more than words could say. The dragon had created joy where none had existed. Veilrix spent more time helping the children from the shadows. He carved toys while Tomas worked on repairs, leaving them in hidden corners. Each toy was different, reflecting the dragon's growing skill and imagination. He began experimenting with moving parts, combining small wheels and hinges. Sometimes the toys did not work as intended, wobbling or falling apart, but the children laughed anyway, fascinated by the strange little creatures that seemed to come alive. As the weeks passed, Veilrix noticed something unexpected. He began to feel proud not only of his toys but of the happiness they brought. Each laugh, each smile, was a small reward, stronger than any treasure or weapon he had ever claimed. He realized that creation itself could change the world, even in a place as lonely and broken as this station. The dragon also learned something about himself. He had lived for centuries, feared and respected, but now he felt connected not through power but through kindness and effort. He could teach, he could give, and he could bring joy without destroying anything. This was a new strength, one he had never known, and it filled him with warmth and light. One evening, Tomas noticed Veilrix lingering near a workbench, examining a partially carved toy dragon. He stepped closer and placed a hand on Veilrix's massive claw. The gesture was simple, but it carried understanding, trust, and friendship. Veilrix felt a strange surge of emotion. He could not name it, but he knew it was good. For the first time, he realized that his life could be more than fear and solitude. Veilrix had discovered a new way of being. He had learned to create, to care, and to bring joy where none existed. Each toy, each small gift, was a part of him, a part of his newfound life. He no longer lived only in the shadows or the fear of others. He had found purpose in something gentle and bright. The dragon's eyes reflected the soft light of the workshop as he placed the last toy carefully on the bench. He looked at Tomas, who was working on a small wooden wheel, and then at the tiny children playing quietly in the lower levels. Veilrix exhaled a small, contented puff of smoke. Creation had replaced destruction. Joy had replaced emptiness. And for the first time, the dragon felt alive in a way he had never known before. Veilrix had been watching the children for weeks, always from the shadows. He had left toys for them quietly, hidden in corners and on empty shelves. Every morning, he would see the smiles and hear the laughter echo through the empty halls of the station. It was a sound he had never known could exist in a place so cold and lonely, and it filled him with warmth he could not name. One evening, Tomas noticed Veilrix lingering near the entrance to the children's quarters. The dragon's massive shadow stretched across the walls, and for a moment, Tomas froze. He had grown used to Veilrix's presence, but seeing him this close to the children was different. The human's heart pounded, but he did not shout or run. Instead, he stepped quietly toward the dragon as if inviting him to make a choice. Veilrix hesitated. Fear and instinct told him to remain hidden, to keep the children safe from his size and power. He remembered how humans had always screamed at his appearance, how they had fled or attacked without understanding. But he also remembered the joy he had seen in the children, the way their faces lit up when they found his toys. That joy was fragile, and he wondered if it could survive without him being brave. The dragon exhaled a slow breath, letting smoke curl into the air. He lowered himself to the ground carefully, moving in a way that would not frighten the children. The metal floor creaked under his weight, and a small noise echoed down the hall. The children froze, their heads turning toward the sound. Their eyes widened as they saw the dragon's massive silhouette, but instead of screaming they only stared. Veilrix's heart beat faster. He had never been seen like this before, and the fear of rejection pressed on him. Tomas stepped forward. He raised a hand slowly and spoke in a calm voice. "It's okay," he said. "He's our friend." The children looked from Tomas to Veilrix, uncertainty and curiosity mixing on their faces. Veilrix lowered his head further, careful not to appear threatening, and moved closer to the small group. One child, a little girl with messy hair and bright eyes, stepped forward. She held out a tiny wooden horse that Veilrix had made weeks ago. The dragon sniffed the toy gently, careful not to crush it. Then, slowly, he nudged it back toward her with his massive claw. The girl laughed, a soft, pure sound that made Veilrix's chest ache with a strange, unfamiliar happiness. One by one, the other children approached, holding toys he had made or pointing to ones they wanted him to look at. Veilrix realized that he did not need to hide any longer. The children accepted him even though he was different, even though he was a dragon. For the first time, Veilrix felt trust without fear. He allowed the children to touch his scales gently, to climb near him on safe surfaces, and to watch him carve small new toys right there in the hall. Tomas stayed nearby, guiding the dragon's massive hands when needed, but mostly letting him interact freely. The workshop, once a quiet place for learning, became a space of laughter, creation, and connection. Word of the dragon spread quietly among the refugees. Some were frightened at first, but seeing the children play and interact with him, their fear began to fade. Velrix's actions showed them that he was not a threat. He did not roar or breathe fire. He only gave and created. He had chosen to be seen, and in doing so, he had shown the humans a new way to live alongside a creature they had once feared. Velrix began taking more initiative. He carved toys specifically for the children, creating small puzzles, spinning tops, and even tiny dragons that could move their heads or wings. Each creation was imperfect but filled with care. The children laughed at the quirks, learning patience and creativity as they played. Velrix discovered that his own joy multiplied when shared, and the sound of laughter became more intoxicating than any treasure or power he had known in centuries of solitude. Tomas watched quietly, proud. He knew the dragon had made the choice to step into the light, to be part of something bigger than himself. Velrix had learned that true strength was not in fear or destruction, but in creation, kindness, and trust. The dragon had taught the humans something as well, that even a creature known for power could choose gentleness and bring joy. One night, Velrix placed dozens of newly carved toys outside the children's quarters. He waited nearby, unseen, to see their reaction. When the doors opened, the children squealed with delight, discovering the gifts. Their laughter echoed through the station, louder and brighter than ever before. The dragon exhaled a small, contented puff of smoke. For the first time he realized that being seen, being accepted, and giving joy could be as powerful as anything he had ever known. Velrix had chosen to step out of the shadows, and in doing so, he had changed not only his life but the lives of everyone around him. The station, once empty and cold, now hummed with the warmth of connection, laughter, and hope. The dragon no longer needed to hide. He had found a place where he belonged, where his creations brought happiness, and where he could finally experience the joy of being more than a creature of fear. From that night on, Velrix worked alongside Tomas and the children openly. He carved toys while they played nearby, taught them how to carefully shape and paint, and watched as their creativity grew. He had discovered a world he never knew existed, a world where strength was measured not by power, but by the joy you could give and share. And as the stars shone coldly outside the station, inside there was warmth, light, and life. Velrix had chosen to be seen, and in that choice, he had learned that creation, kindness, and trust could be the greatest adventures of all. Velrix had never imagined that his life could feel like this. The once lonely dragon now spent his days surrounded by laughter, light, and small hands holding his creations. The workshop, once quiet and empty, had become a place of constant movement. Children ran through the halls, carrying tiny wooden animals and painted spaceships, while Tomas guided them gently, showing them how to build, fix, and care for each toy. Word spread through the station quickly. Other humans, curious about the dragon who made toys, came to see him. At first they were frightened, recalling tales of the great dragon Velrix had been. But seeing him carve, paint, and carefully place toys in the children's hands, their fear melted into wonder. Velrix did not roar or breathe fire. He only created, and his creations brought joy. Slowly the humans began to trust him, and some even stayed to help Tomas repair the station and assist the children. Velrix discovered something remarkable. Other dragons were watching from far away. Creatures like him, fierce and powerful, had heard rumors of a dragon who did not destroy but gave. Some came quietly, curious and unsure. Velrix welcomed them, showing them how gentle effort and care could change lives. He taught them to carve wood, assemble simple toys, and paint carefully. The other dragons were clumsy at first, their claws too large, their wings too heavy, but they learned through practice, guided by Velrix's patience. The station transformed. Factories that had once produced only weapons or machinery were converted into workshops for making toys and simple inventions. Velrix worked alongside humans and dragons alike. He carved dragons, animals, vehicles, and little moving contraptions. Children laughed and learned, building their own creations under his guidance. Tomas watched proudly, seeing that the dragon had grown beyond what he thought possible. Velrix had not just learned to create. He had become a teacher, a guide, and a source of hope. Evenings were the dragon's favorite time. The children would gather near the workshop, listening as Velrix carefully explained, through gestures and gentle movements, how to shape, carve, and paint. Some would try to imitate him, their small hands moving clumsily, but he encouraged them quietly, never showing impatience. He had learned from Tomas that teaching and creating together was a joy unlike any other. The dragon's life became a legacy. Children who had once cried in emptiness now held toys that Velrix had made, and they learned how to make their own. Refugees who had feared the station now felt a sense of home. Other dragons, inspired by Veilrix's example, traveled to distant stations, teaching the lessons of creation and care. His influence spread quietly but steadily across human and dragon communities alike. One day Tomas handed Veilrix a small wooden figure, a tiny dragon painted in bright colors. "You see what you've done?" Tomas said softly. "This is not just a toy. It's hope, and you made it possible." Veilrix lifted the figure gently with his claw and examined it. He had not realized until that moment how far he had come, from a creature of fear to a creator of joy, from isolation to connection. Veilrix began experimenting with more complex creations. He built small moving toys powered by simple mechanisms, tiny vehicles that rolled across the floor, and little dragons with wings that flapped when pushed. Each toy was imperfect, but it carried care, thought, and creativity. Children would gather around, laughing, learning, and sharing in the dragon's excitement. Veilrix realized that his joy had multiplied through giving, and each smile, each laugh, made him feel alive in a way he had never known in centuries of solitude. As the station grew brighter and busier, Veilrix reflected on his journey. He had learned patience, kindness, and the value of creation. He had stepped out of the shadows and shown that even the most feared creature could bring happiness. His actions had inspired humans and dragons alike, proving that gentle effort could create stronger bonds than fear or power ever could. The dragon no longer needed to hide in corners or move silently through empty corridors. Children climbed safely near him, dragons followed his guidance, and humans respected his choice to bring joy rather than destruction. Veilrix had become part of a community that valued life, creativity, and happiness above all else. His presence transformed the station into a home, a place where hope could grow. Even in the vast emptiness of space outside, Veilrix felt connected. The cold stars no longer seemed distant or lonely. He had found a purpose, a calling that filled the emptiness he had carried for centuries. Every toy he carved, every laugh he heard, and every small dragon he helped teach became a part of his legacy. He understood now that true strength was not measured by fear, but by the joy and hope one could bring into the world. Veilrix's life had changed completely. He was no longer a dragon feared across the stars. He was a creator, a teacher, and a friend. Children ran through the station carrying his toys, dragons learned patience and care from him, and humans marveled at what one creature could achieve. Veilrix realized that joy was contagious, and by choosing to share it, he had created something that would last far longer than any battle or fire. In the evenings, as the workshop glowed softly with lamps and the laughter of children filled the halls, Veilrix would look around and feel a warmth unlike anything he had ever known. He had found joy for the first time in his long life. It was not a fleeting spark or a moment of pride. It was steady, alive, and growing. And he knew that this joy, this creation, this legacy, would continue to grow long after he was gone. The dragon had learned from a human that life could be more than fear, more than solitude, more than destruction. He had learned that gentle hands and a patient heart could change the world. And in that lesson, Veilrix had found not only happiness but purpose. The station, once silent and empty, now echoed with life, laughter, and hope. Veilrix had become more than a dragon. He had become a symbol of what could be achieved when kindness, patience, and creation were chosen over fear and destruction. And so, surrounded by toys, children, and friends, Veilrix finally understood what it meant to live fully. His joy had become a legacy, a gift to all who encountered it. The dragon who had once known only solitude and fear now knew laughter, connection, and hope. And in that knowledge he felt complete.